Chapter 29. False Truths. Months had gone by. While forces from the royal army had begun heading north to repair and man the castles along the wall, the wildlings had settled. The gift. Ned had instructed every house in the north to begin preparing for war. Stannis had regular shipments of dragon glass weapons shipped to White Harbor, and Lord Manderley would have his people bring shipments to each house, as well as the castles along the wall. Ravens were sent to every major house in the realm, calling for as many troops as possible. House Lannister sent the majority of their forces. House Baratheon sent a half of their men. Houses Martell and Tyrell sent 2/3 of their available forces. Sellswords and civilians also flocked to my call for aid. House Tyrell, led by Mace's efforts as master of stores, began shipping massive quantities of grains and goods to feed the ever-growing host. Ned eventually sent an edict that every man and woman of fighting age, save for the very young or very old, was commanded to take up arms. Those who could not were ordered to take up residence in Winterfell, which had become my de facto seat from which I would send edicts or commands. Raven arrived by the flock daily bearing news and requests for my attention. It was a time-consuming effort to go through each scroll daily to ensure that all the needs of the realm were being met, but it was something made easier with the available nobility who had come with the forces sent from the south. It didn't exactly matter where the monarch ruled from, so long as the rule was consistent and fair. The only real benefit for me was that courtiers and petitioners didn't want to make the trip to Winterfell in order to put their cases before the crown. If the matter wasn't convenient enough to travel for, it wasn't important enough for a raven to be sent. This alleviated a great deal of excess matters from my plate. Seeing such a reaction from the rest of the realm, from baseborn to the highest of nobles, told me that I was doing things right. I had fostered enough faith and goodwill from the citizenry that they took my call to aid to heart. This was different from when I had been on Thedas, since I had been born into the monarchy and had ingratiated myself with the dwarves by actively working to improve their lives from the beginning. Here, I had to work to claim the crown, then work to show my intentions as their ruler. It showed me that my methods worked, that the way I worked and the methods I used were reliable. If I could manipulate events to gain the crown, I could reliably use that power in future universes to improve the lives of the people. Still, with months going by, I began to grow curious, and everyone began to grow concerned. While the army of the dead didn't move fast, it never stopped moving. We should have seen some signs of their movements by now. It wasn't until a band of wildlings approached the wall, ragged and weak, that we had some news on the progress of the dead. From what they said, they were all that was left of a hunting party that had been away from their clan's camp when the dead attacked. They had seen the attack happen from a distance and simply began to run back to the wall. It had taken them days, fear and desperation pushing them past the limits their bodies tried to impose upon them. Unfortunately, they hadn't stayed long enough to get a decent guess at the dead's numbers, but it was at least enough to easily overwhelm the 2,000 or so members of their clan. This news put the dead only a few days out. They tended to walk slowly, but since they never stopped, it meant that they would only be about 100 miles out at most. I reached out with my stone sense and found the horde easily enough. The dead didn't exactly lift their feet when they were slogging through snow, so their pattern came through like static. They were concentrated in a large area, slowly moving south. There were a group of stragglers that kept a respectable distance behind the main host, as if pushing them forward. I had to assume that these were the Whites and the Night King. So we stood at the top of the wall days after the handful of wildlings had arrived. Sarah, Alan, and I watched as the forest beyond Castle Black burned thanks to Mehrunes and the other dragons. The final obstacle, Serena said as the wind snapped and bit at her. This should be fairly simplistic. They don't have a dragon to help get past the wall. We have hundreds of thousands of soldiers all equipped with dragon glass weapons. We know who to target and what our strategy is. You say stuff like that, and it's going to jinx us, Alan replied as he crossed his arms. He scanned the horizon, trying to will himself to see through the smoke. Don't be absurd, Serena scoffed. We have every advantage in this scenario. Every advantage except that for every soldier of ours that falls, the enemy gets a fresh recruit, Alan countered. All the enemies we've ever faced up to this point stayed dead when they were killed. This one doesn't. I hate it when you have a point, Serena huffed. Still, we're not fielding any troops on the other side of the wall, so the likelihood of them killing any of us is negligible. I listened to them talk in silence. All around us were silent members of the Queen's Guard, men of the Night's Watch, wildlings and sellswords, common folk and nobles, all arrayed along the top of the wall. If anyone else was talking, it would surprise me. The gathered forces stirred as additional smoke began to rise from the woods. The light of the fires began to slowly dim as something began to douse the flames prematurely. All eyes were fixed on the dying fires as even more smoke from the dying flames filled the area. There, I said as the first shambling silhouette broke through the thick smoke. It shakily continued forward as if every step might snap its legs, each step jagged and twisted. Soon, another figure appeared from the smoke, then 4 more, then dozens, then hundreds. The dead streamed forward slowly but inexorably toward the wall. As the mass of bodies flowed from the smoke, 4 pale figures mounted on rotting horses appeared at the back of the undead host, seeming to herd the others, like ghastly shepherds. Alan looked over at me, his brow rising. 4 White Walkers. No Night King? There's a different problem, I replied as I kept my eyes on the undead horde. What's that? Serena asked. I nodded toward the gathering host. Look at them. How many bodies do you think are down there? Best guess. Serena hummed as she looked out over the open ground. Perhaps 10,000. That doesn't make any sense, Alan replied. There should be at least 10 times that amount. If there's only 10,000, that would mean that after the wildling clan they attacked, there would have only been about half that amount prior to the attack. The undead don't send part of their forces, do they? No, I said definitively. They do not. And they don't use wave or diversionary tactics either, do they? Serena asked. I shook my head. Something is very wrong. I reached out with my stone sense, searching the whole of Westeros. There was nothing out of the norm. No mass movement that shouldn't be happening. No large group of people where there shouldn't be. Nothing that... Oh, no, I whispered with dread. I whirled on Serena. Take command for the next few minutes. I need to check on something. Serena looked concerned. What's wrong? I'm not sure yet, I replied. But 10,000 undead aren't going to make a dent against the forces we've managed to put together. Keep the fight at range. Use as much fire as possible. What do I tell the others? Serena asked. Just that I'm checking on something important, I said as I turned to Alan. Open a portal to the Iron Island. Alan immediately began to summon a portal. Mehrunes, I called out. Mehrunes and the other dragons were resting on the roofs of Castle Black. He let out a loud roar and took to the sky, soaring up to the top of the wall. Everyone nearby cleared the area so that he could land beside me. At this point, he was nearly as wide as the wall itself and close to 30 feet long. You could have said a dragon-sized portal, Alan said as he adjusted the size of the portal. Now's not the time for jokes, I admonished him. Right, he cleared his throat as the portal took on its ready state, Castle Pike clear in the background. I pat Mehrunes' side. Let's go. Mehrunes grunted and moved through the portal, quickly followed by Alan. As we appeared on the island, Mehrunes took to the air. What's wrong, Merida? Mehrunes asked. We soared around Castle Pike. You look upset. Look around, Mehrunes, I replied as I reached out with my stone sense. What do you see? Mayroon scanned the ground carefully as he glided along the cliffsides that led to Castle Black, then down the coast. I don't see anything. What should I be looking for? The fact that you don't see anything is precisely what I mean, I replied as I pointed to the waters around the coast. This is the Iron Island. There should be dozens of ships out fishing, and even more on patrol, or importing goods. As Mayroon approached one of the smaller dock towns, I tugged on his reins and he slowed to a halt, beating his wings to hover in place. See? No one is working the docks, I pointed out. No one is pointing up and shouting, "Dragon!" There's no one here. I don't sense anyone on the island at all. Where could an entire island worth of people go without somebody knowing? Mayroon asked as he continued his flight around the island's shoreline. Surely someone would have sent a raven, or some ship would have been able to have escaped what happened to tell others. My mind reeled with the possibilities. The Ironborn were fierce warriors at sea, but didn't have the experience to fight a proper land battle. While some had joined the Royal Army, most had remained as part of our coastal defense and mercantile shipping efforts. The Iron Island should have been teeming with coastal activity at the very least. Nothing made sense. There had been no interruption in the shipping lanes, no break into the coastal defenses. Nowhere else in Westeros was silent, and activity was normal everywhere else. Alan's mind touched mine with a telepathy spell. Merida, I don't mean belittle this mystery, but you're needed back at the wall. Disappearing just before the battle and not being back for it will look bad. I scowled, even as the truth of his words hit me. This mystery would still be here after the battle, and it had been poor judgment to simply leave to investigate it. I pat Mayroon's side. Let's go back. We need to be at the battle. We're returning, I replied to Alan as Mayroon turned to bring us around. Have the portal open. We'll be coming in hot. I could almost feel the laughter in his response. Ready when you are. Mayroon streaked through the air, keeping himself low. Sand and debris leapt into the air in his wake. The portal Alan had created appeared soon enough, with the cold landscape of the north inviting us within it. He carried me through like a missile, and the freezing winds clawed at us as we soared into the air above the wall. We'd been gone for nearly half an hour, and the battle was well underway. Mayroon bellowed out a roar upon our return, and dipped below a volley arrows as dove toward the ground. His bellow was only inches away from the ice of the wall as he hurled himself toward the ground. Below us, undead had begun to attack the gate that blocked the tunnel through the wall. Mayroon might not be as big as could grow to yet, but he could at least help make this fight a lot easier. Mayroon belched forth a pillar of flame over the undead at the gate as he righted himself and soared over the sprinting crowd of corpses. I guided him off to the side and back up to the top of the wall. Mayroon might be useful in the fight, but he wasn't large enough that arrows wouldn't hurt him quite yet. He could be used to keep dead from the gate, but anything more would hinder the effectiveness of the archers and catapults. The battle went on for another hour and was as stale as possible. The dead ran at the wall and tried to break through the gate. The living fired dragon glass arrows and barrels of burning pitch. Alan and the few other mages on hand hurled fireballs. I rode Mayroon and guided the dragons to make strafing runs along the wall, keep the dead off of the gate, with dragonfire. It was as easy as you could hope for, until something strange happened. With only a fifth of their forces remaining, the undead stopped. Every corpse charging the wall froze in place. They stood still for several agonizing moments, even as arrows and pitch rained down on them. Then, in complete unison, those not on fire simply turned and began to walk back toward the tree line. Men cheered and roared with victory as the dead began to leave. The victory cries rang hollow in my ears. Even as the dead shambled back into the forest, the White Walkers remained just outside the tree line, staring at us. Something was wrong. but I couldn't figure out what. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold of the north. The dead were using wave tactics. They were backing out of a fight they couldn't win. They were retreating in relatively good order, if simply walking away could be considered good order. And their leaders weren't fleeing the field. They remained until the rest of their creatures had slipped into the forest, before slowly turning and moving back into the forest as well. Even as then, men cheered me as I dismounted Mayroon in the courtyard of Castle Black, I couldn't bring myself to smile. Typically, I would play up the victory to keep up morale, but something about this just didn't seem right. The way the undead weren't acting right. The Iron Island was empty, but nothing concerning the ships had stopped. There were too many questions with no answers, too many anomalies with no way to connect them. This was not how the story went. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong.